Oh man, y'all were like talking still. I feel like we didn't give you guys enough time. Apparently you were very ambitious 10-year-olds. Awesome, awesome. Well, welcome. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for being part of our gathering today. Welcome to Restoration Church. We love getting to gather like this. We love getting to see all the ways that our mission of becoming a kind of restorative community where all people are empowered to love and follow Jesus is just such a thrill and such a delight to see people like Stanley, to see people week after week using their gifts to build this church. So thank you for being part of this. And as Stanley said, we're continuing our gathering. We're continuing our teaching series that Kurt and I actually kicked off last Sunday. We started off this whole idea of, talking about relationships because this just simply straight up affects our lives so deeply, doesn't it? So last week we talked about how to take responsibility for the me that I bring to we. As sort of like the starting point, we wanted to be sure that we can only be healthy relationally if we're healthy, and that starts with us, because you are the single common denominator in every single one of your relationships. And we discovered that healthy relationships require a plan, right? If we want to see spiritual fruit like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, if we want to see those fruits flourishing in our relationships, in our dating, in our marriages, or with our children, or with our parents, right? If we want to see all of our relationships flourishing with these kinds of qualities, we have to have a plan. We can't just leave it up to chance, because healthy relationships don't just happen by accident. And so if you missed last week, I highly recommend checking it out, because it was a really good one. And today, we're actually building on last week's big idea. Today, we're looking at another important aspect of our relationships that plays into everything that we do, how we make choices, how we interact with one another, and that's desire. And I think it's safe to say that for so many of us, we've probably misunderstood the role desire plays in our spirituality, and therefore the effects that has on every single one of our human relationships. I experienced it just this week, so I'll share a little example with you. So Kurt and I, we really love to host, whether it's parties like decades parties, or just in our home having, birthday parties. We go big for birthday parties, for holidays, whether it's just, having people over for dinner. Whatever it is, we love entertaining. We love getting people together. It just really speaks to our soul and brings us joy. And this also causes another tension at times, because we rent a tiny townhouse here, and we have 3 kids. And so the very real reality, even though we, hope, it's kind of our big hope and our big desire to one day own a house that's big enough to host the kinds of things we love to host. But this is the tension that it creates, because this desire is real to one day, be able to host in this way. But I actually, kind of felt the ping of this desire just this week as, we were hosting one of the summer hangouts that we've been doing all summer long. And some of you in the room were here at it. We did a mother-daughter brunch. And we talked about confidence, and it was so great. And to see all these little, girls who love Jesus and they're growing in community, it was so sweet. But we actually had to, switch locations. As much as I wanted to, host this in our home, we ended up switching to be here at the church, which was great, right? I was grateful that we had a space to do that, a beautiful, building that we can host the 24 mother-daughter combos that ended up coming and experiencing community together. And it was this moment of realizing that the invitation that I had was I could just talk down that desire, talk down that thing, and just because it worked out well to be okay, but the invitation in that moment that I felt was to both and, to yes, to lean deeply into the gratitude for this amazing community that we're building, to the fact that a small pivot, that's not that big of a deal. No one cared that we were here at the church instead of our house, but to stay attentive to the desire as well, to not talk myself out of it, That just because it's unrealized, I can still have hope. This can still be a place of trusting God's provision and timing for the future. And I know so many of you are like, yeah, we live in San Diego. Isn't that pretty much like most of us? The truth is that when we stay connected to our desire, God can do some pretty incredible things. And so I don't know about you. I don't know about, when you think of desire, maybe what comes to mind, especially in a church context, right? Because church and desire, that usually is kind of a loaded topic. And it's easy to see with religion this confusing messaging, right? If you grew up in or around church, maybe you've heard that not to follow the desires of your heart because it can deceive us, right? Or maybe you heard that temptation is bad and God's way is good, black versus white, in versus out, right versus wrong. And that's not just Christianity, right? One achieves nirvana or enlightenment by being set free from greed and abusive, living, which is caused by, dun, 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 you guessed it, desire, right? So not just Christianity, but most religious constructs approach desire as this thing to hold back, to play small, to not let that creep in too much to the way that God wants us to live. But when I look at the God of the Bible, I see something a little bit different. So I'm excited to jump into this a little bit because the truth is that religion says desire is bad, right? There's no way around it. Most of us, if we grew up in a religious setting, maybe that is just, it maybe wasn't said that up front, but maybe we just kind of intuited that, to desire is bad or sinful or wrong. So if a system of behavior modification and lists of rules, if that's all it takes, then why does repressing our desire and cutting off this part of us also feel so unfulfilling, right? So what's the flip side of religion's view, right? If repressing desire and holding ourselves, hostage and never actually wanting anything, if that's maybe not God's best, then what's maybe the flip side to that? We've all probably seen this or maybe lived this at some point, the opposite, right? Maybe some in the room today, you're here at church because you're wondering, how do I not do that? But also this life I'm living where, I'm kind of doing whatever I want, whenever I want, that's not working for me too well either, right? But maybe some of us have operated out of this other set of beliefs that our culture is selling us, right? That our culture is saturated with messages of what we should desire in order to be complete or happy, right? Make this amount of money, drive this kind of car, certainly not a minivan, but drive this kind of car, do whatever is necessary to make your body look this way so that you can wear these clothes, so that you can impress this kind of person, so that you can have this kind of relational status, so that you can be the envy and the desire of all of these other people and earn approval and Instagram likes. That is what our culture is selling us, friends. And if we're not careful, we can get swept right up in that. Because culture says that desire is God. That culture says that desire is God. That your desire is all that matters, right? If you want it, take it. Just do it. Get all you can. Look out for number one, right? This is basically what advertising's job is to do, right? Is to convince you of what you need and why you need it, and to pull at all those little insecurities that tell us in order to be loved, liked, admired, accepted, we need to do X, Y, and Z. And the problem with this belief, I don't know about you, but for me, it's exhausting. It's exhausting, friends. Chasing these desires that may look impressive on the outside, but deep down at a soul level, leave us feeling just as empty. Leave us feeling just as much longing. God's word says it this way, that what do you get if you gain the whole world but lose your soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? That's an important question for us to wrestle with. I mean, this is the question that Jesus asks his disciples right after inviting them to forget their own way, to pick up their cross, and to follow him. Right after predicting his own death and stuff, right? Pick up your cross, follow me. Oh yeah, and this is where I'm going. I'm going to die this and suffer this horrendous death, right? But he says, this is what I'm calling you to, of leaving your own way to come and follow me. And friends, this is challenging, isn't it? It is challenging to wrestle with our desires. And Jesus, he gives us such a counter-cultural view into the heart of God when it comes to understanding this whole role that desire plays. Not religious repression on one side, but also not conforming to every whim that our culture tries to sell us either, right? What is the clear path that God invites us to? See, God actually says that desire is a guide, right? That our desire can show us important things. Our desire can ultimately lead us to God. Our desire might take us on an interesting path, but eventually, staying awake and present to desire can be a very spiritually transforming thing, right? And the truth is that God is a relational God. We talked about in the last series, talking about the Bible for grown-ups, is that one uniqueness about the God of Scriptures is that there's a unique design, and there's also a unique divine desire that God has for every single person who's made in his image. And since we're made in the image of God, we also have desires within us too. Desire for relationship. You see, there's this dynamic that begins to shape us when we are in relationship to God. Similar to when we are in relationships with people, right? Connection changes us. Any parents of teenagers in the room, or if you've had teenagers recently, like you feel this acutely. You feel this in every fiber of your being because you know it's true that who you choose to surround yourself with affects who you're becoming, right? So when we're in connection with a holy, a perfect, a loving, and a purely good being, namely God, it begins to transform and to heal and to reveal our truest selves. See, here's the deal. Healthy desires have the power to reveal God's will for our lives. Healthy desires also have the power to heal brokenness in and around us, right? When we're aware of what we are needing, that we're not quite there yet, that might compel us to go to therapy or to seek help or to invite a friend or to call up someone who understands, right? So relationally, in like our interpersonal lives as well as systemically, right? A healthy desire might well up to see an injustice in our world or to see a system changed or to see people made in the image of God being treated and provided for and cared for, right? Healthy desires have the power to heal brokenness around us. Healthy desires also have the power to restore the belonging and the connection that our souls were designed for. When we feel a desire, when we feel loneliness, that's desire. That's desire saying, I wish I had a friend who I can confide in. When we feel an ache in our marriage, feeling like, gosh, how did we get to this point where we're functioning more like roommates than lovers, right? That ache, that's a desire saying, I'm wishing and longing for more in my marriage, right? Desires, healthy desires can actually lead us. They have the power to lead us to healthy, positive, good changes that our hearts and our souls crave. So if we're willing to stay curious, it's possible that our desires are actually guiding us towards something good, something true, something transformative. But here's the catch, right? Discernment, humility, and honesty are certainly part of that process. But the deal, it's undeniable, right? We see this all throughout the life of Jesus, that he seemed to have a lot to say about the connection between faith and our prayers and our desires, right? Like in Matthew 7, verse 7, it says, ask and it will be given to you. Search and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. I mean, that seems like a pretty bold invitation. That seems like a pretty awesome thing that Jesus just throws out there, along with this other striking statement referring, to God's providence, when it comes to our wants and our needs. needs and our desires. He tells, in the Sermon on the Mount, look at the flowers of the field, look at the birds of the air. Isn't God is going to take care of them? Surely he loves you more than these, reminding us that as much as he cares for them, he will also care. He knows our needs. He's not going to ignore us and leave us stranded. He says, so in light of that, set your hearts on God's kingdom first and on God's righteousness, and then all these other things will be given to you as well. It's right-sizing this desire, right? How do we make sure our desires stay healthy? It's as if Jesus is inviting us to say, in that last one especially, desire God's kingdom first. Desire God, just everything that you're going to inherit from God, this right way of living that I'm calling you to. He says, actually, desire the biggest thing that you can possibly desire. And he says, and then, in light of that, all of these other desires will fall into place when that first desire is locked in. That's pretty bold, right? Jesus invites us to trust that all of these smaller needs will be met. And that isn't meant to trivialize or to play small to our very real practical needs, but rather to put them in this perspective to help us prioritize our deepest desire so that everything, like I said, flows from there. Otherwise, like we just talked about, otherwise, we become lost on this restless quest of ceaseless striving, or we become so trapped in this religious culture of repression, right? But Jesus says, no, dream big, desire all that you know is coming, and then live this life in light of that future. So, you're like, wow, that's a lot. How do I actually do this transformative work of letting desire be a guide, right? How do we actually make that happen? See, what tends to hold us back from our desires, right? Maybe as you're thinking about yourself, like that question I love, what did you want for your birthday as a 10-year-old kid? When we were little kids, no one had to tell us it was okay to want. Kids just naturally do that. It's just hardwired. I know all the parents in the room are laughing. You're I'm laughing right now too, because I know that. I have 3 little kids. They're 8, they're 6, they're 4. They are little tiny humans that want so much stuff at all times, right? And again, as a parent, our job is to help them learn all of these other skills, all of these other things. I hope that as they grow, their wants shift and change, and I love that through being a part of Restoration Kids, that they want to grow in their faith. There's a lot of things we do and don't do to make that a priority in our life because that is important to us. It's important that they have that foundation as well, right? So what tends to hold us back? When we were kids, we didn't even question it. We just voiced it. But as adults, why is it that we hold back? Why does it feel so vulnerable sometimes to be honest about our wants and our desires? I have a hunch. I have 2 things that I think kind of holds us back, and maybe you can kind of find yourself in one of these camps. I think fear often keeps us playing small, right? We'll repress a desire because it feels safer than letting it out, right? As soon as I share what a desire is, I'm vulnerable because it could not happen. I could be disappointed if I say I want this thing and then it doesn't come to pass, right? Maybe it's that new job promotion. Maybe it's your first job and you're just hoping, right? You're just in that moment of life where there's so much opportunity and you're like, is this gonna happen for me, right? Maybe it feels vulnerable to want your dream job. Or maybe it's initiating date night with a partner. Maybe that feels vulnerable. Maybe it's new, or maybe the relationship is in a tough spot, right? Paying attention to our desires helps us tune into, wow, is there a fear that is blocking me from initiating this? For some of us, maybe it's asking a new friend out to coffee for the first time. That feels vulnerable, but you see something in that person, you're like, I feel like we would, I feel like you'd be a good friend, right? Another scary one is maybe voicing our desire for sexual intimacy with a spouse. That feels vulnerable. That feels like I'm putting part of myself out there and I don't want to feel rejected, so I'm not even going to bring it up. Or, just we keep our desires silenced out of fear. Another one is restlessness, right? Maybe our desire might not seem clear because we're so exhausted. Maybe we haven't slowed down long enough, gotten alone or gotten quiet long enough to sit with and to sort out our thoughts, to really reflect on what we truly want. Maybe how this looks practically, maybe you find yourself just going through the motions rather than being fully present at work or at home. Right? Maybe for you, this restlessness looks like, knowing full well that you're burnt out, but for whatever reason, you just keep going and going and going. Maybe this restlessness shows up for you looking like numbing with Netflix or doom scrolling on social media at night, because as long as you're distracted, those restless thoughts won't creep in, right? So sometimes we hold back out of fear, we hold back out of simple restlessness of not knowing how to even name our desires. But here's the truth that we're going to dig into a little bit today that I'm excited about, because Jesus often invited people to be in touch with their desires. We're going to look at a passage that hopefully gives us some freedom and hopefully takes the pressure off too, because I know this can sound like a really daunting topic. But in thinking, we sometimes get too much in our heads thinking that we have to get it right every time, or that we have to come to God with a strategized proposal about our desires, rather than our kind of raw, unfiltered desires, the real desires. God says those are welcome and those are wanted. And so I'm going to invite you. We're going to be in Mark 10, verses 35 through 45, if you're the device type of Bible person, or you can grab one of the blue Bibles in the seat pocket in front of you. And we say this every time that we gather like this. If you don't have a Bible that you can read, that you can understand, that doesn't sound like Shakespearean weird lingo, this Bible in your hands is now yours. We hope you can take it, because we believe that the heart of God is revealed through his word. So we're going to be on page 607 in the blue Bible. So as you turn there, I'm going to give you a little bit of backstory. And here's the deal. Mark chapters like 8 through 10 all have so many amazing stories of people's desire as they're interacting with Jesus. I actually kind of had a hard time picking which one I was going to land on this week. So if you want some further reading this week, check it out. Those are like 3 chapters in a row that's just like desire story after desire, and you see how Jesus interacts with people. It's fascinating. But anyways, the story that we are going to touch on today takes place. The disciples had just been with Jesus. They had been doing ministry with him. Jesus had been healing and doing miracles. He'd been teaching rich and poor alike, blessing children. And this just kind of sets the scene. To set the scene, he had also, in light of all of those miracles and blessings and just loving people as he does, he had also just revealed to his disciples in a private teaching moment that he was actually going to die, that he was going to suffer, that he was going to experience, he didn't go into the details too much, but he told them, like, this is what I am here on the planet to do. I will give up my life for the redemption of the world. And they didn't quite understand what he meant, but at this point, it was like the second time he had said it, so they're kind of starting to put the pieces together. They were probably in some stages of grief, of maybe they were in the denial or the bargaining, but here is the space where this story picks up in Mark chapter 10, verse 35. So James and John, who were 2 of Jesus' closest disciples, they were the sons of Zebedee. They were sometimes called the sons of thunder, meaning that they were just your zealous, boisterous. They were just like a personality and a half. They were some of Jesus' nearest and dearest. But as James and John, as we keep going, the sons of Zebedee, they came over and they spoke to him, saying, "Teacher," they said, "we want you to do us a favor." Oh, okay. That's very clear, all right? They feel no hesitation coming to Jesus to ask for a favor. What is your request? Jesus asked. So here we see that it takes quite a bit of courage to name what we want. And Jesus seems to have a lot of openness to James and John's boldness. That's equally striking as their question that's about to come next. So here's what they ask. It says, they replied, "When you sit on your glorious throne, we want to sit in the places of honor next to you, one on your right and the other on your left." Okay, James and John, that's a bold ask. Then here's what Jesus says. But Jesus said to them, "You don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink from the bitter cup of suffering that I am about to drink? Are you able to be baptized with the baptism of suffering that I must be baptized with?" "Oh, yes," they replied, "we are able," right? Really? Really? I've got to imagine Jesus being a little bit surprised that question was their takeaway after he had just done all these miracles, told them of what he was about to endure, that is what they took from his sharing with him about his upcoming suffering. And here's the deal, though. Even by exposing their false desire, Jesus pulls on the thread to get a little bit deeper into that desire. I can read on. It says, "Then Jesus told them that you will indeed drink from my bitter cup and be baptized with my baptism of suffering." Awesome. Okay, noted. "But I have no right to say who will sit on my right and my left, because God has prepared those places for the ones that he has chosen." Right? See, I love that Jesus even gives such a compassionate answer, right? He sees their desire, even as he helps them see their desire more clearly. He doesn't shame them, which, let's be honest, a question like that maybe deserves a little bit of, okay, right? He doesn't shame them, but he sees the goodness. Because he knows them, he sees the goodness in their hearts, though they don't even seem to have a full understanding yet of how it works, right? Or what the ramifications would simply be. He's right? What would the ramifications be if Jesus had that? "Sure, come on, you guys. Who wants righty and who wants lefty? Let's go. Let's do." Could you imagine if that was Jesus's response? But let's see where it goes as we keep reading, because that's not. Jesus takes them a little bit deeper into what he wants them to know about his kingdom. It says, "When the 10 other disciples heard what James and John had asked, they were indignant, as they should be. So Jesus called them together and said, 'You know that the rulers of this world lord it over their people, and the officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But,' Jesus says, 'among you, it'll be different.' He says, 'Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first among you must be a slave of everyone else. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many.'" See, Jesus, even in this brazen expression of desire, even in this question that with so much care and compassion wrapped around it, Jesus sees it for what it is. He's like, "I actually do see the goodness behind your heart in what you're asking," right? Jesus helps them to see that their desire for proximity and closeness to him, that is actually a good thing. That's actually a beautiful and honoring thing to want closeness to Jesus. Maybe they were contending with the loss of what it would be to not have him by their side day after day. That they're like, "Well, can we be close to you when we're there?" Right? That's actually a beautiful thing. Jesus also sees that they wanted influence and authority. Again, not a bad thing if used in a healthy way. So he refines their desire and helps them see that hierarchy and power without servant leadership are actually dangerous to a community, right? We see that in the reaction that the other disciples had. They were indignant. They were like, "Jesus doesn't play favorites, and you of all people should know that. And how would you even ask?" I can imagine what the dinner conversation would have been like that night. How they eventually sorted out what kind of clearing conversations might they have had amongst their little community of their 12, right? Jesus opens a door. He's taking this desire, while a little misguided and maybe a little bit selfish, Jesus is bringing a deeper teach, right? This is a powerful truth, right? I think the church is still learning this over and over again about how hierarchy and power without servant leadership is dangerous for a community. That's a good takeaway, right? Back to the main point. James and John, because of this vulnerability, because of this power that they were actually able to unleash, this ability to transform happened because they were willing to voice a desire that probably felt vulnerable, that probably felt a little scary, but it led to their transformation. Led to them getting put in their place a little bit, sure, but it also created deeper learning for their community. It ended up being a gift because of Jesus, because of the way Jesus took it from there. And so, as we kind of look at this passage, as we apply this to our lives, as we think, okay, just the process alone in examining our desire, even that, right? This is a great takeaway, I think, for all of us, that even the process of examining our own desire, that is an intimacy building process with God. And when it comes to our desires, it's important to ask the question, am I really ready for what I'm asking for? That's probably a good question to ask. I think if James and John had asked that question, am I ready for what I'm asking for? That would have maybe not, maybe who knows? But I think that's a good question for us to say, am I really ready for what I'm asking for, right? And then to double down a little bit deeper to say, and do I want it bad enough that I'm willing to reorient my life, to build a new strategy for the rest of my life, that if I'm naming this desire, do I want it bad enough to change, to pivot, right? Because giving our desire a voice gives our desire direction, which can then lead to transformation. I don't want you to miss that giving our desire a voice gives our desire direction, which then leads to transformation. See, once I know what I desire, once you know what you desire, we become responsible to rearrange our lives around it. See, this is the vulnerable work that God invites us to, but we don't often want to do that because we don't want to be disappointed, right? What if it takes longer? What if we fail, right? So when it comes to our relationships, right, how does this affect our relationships? The same dynamic that we do when we bring our desires to God, that same dynamic happens in our relationships. And so how do we apply this? Well, I'm so glad you asked. When it comes to our relationships, usually there's two kinds of people. So this, I'm just going to warn you a little bit. This may feel a little bit like the uncomfy stretch that some of us might need to step into, because most of us are kind of a mixed bag of both of these things. It's not something where if you're one, you should feel, oh, I'm a terrible. This is not meant to create shame. This is meant to give us a little bit of illumination into how we can all step into some deeper maturity, right? Every single one of us. I'm both of these people sometimes, all right? The first is people who pursue every desire. People who pursue every desire carelessly create emotional instability, right? What does that look like? Chasing every whim without considering the impact that their decision is having on others, right? This might look like jumping from relationship to relationship, or from job to job, or from church to church without actually knowing what they want. Just hoping that some kind of like undefined expectation will be met. If I just try a new thing, maybe this will work. Maybe it's something external out of me, but the invitation here is to pause, to slow down, to look within, to slow down long enough to ask, what are those wants? What are those desires? Then there's also people who process their desires honestly. And people who process their desires honestly create emotional safety, right? People who process their desires honestly create emotional safety in their relationships. Now, we probably read that one, you're like, I want to be that one. I want to be that person, right? You understood the assignment. That's great. But this happens by bringing other trusted friends or our partner or our family and our friends in to understand our desires, by inviting them to help in the discerning process, especially if the decision affects them in a big way, right? Kurt and I have conversations like this just last night over dinner, right? Conversations like this where you're like, I don't even really know if I'm fully dialed in on what this desire is, but we're working it out, right? We're naming some things. We're helping reflect one another of, hey, I heard you say this, right? Being that kind of friend, being that kind of partner with one another is healthy and good, right? People who process their desires honestly and create this kind of emotional safety, it also might look like, if you're in a committed relationship, to be able to name some desires rather than, if they love me, they should just know. Right? How many have fallen into that trap? Sorry, all the guys in the room are like, oh. You've been on the other side of this, haven't you? Or it could look like this. We're quick to confess. We're quick to ask for and extend forgiveness in this process of learning and failing and growing together, right? Because it's a process. None of us just automatically wake up and we're this emotionally safe person 100% of the time. It takes work. It has to be cultivated. And here's the deal, that desires actually hold such tremendous power to bond us, to grow us, to heal even broken relationships, to go deeper with each other and to go deeper with God. Desires can point us to the limitless possibilities that exist in God, because God's already there in the future. Isn't that a crazy thought? That God already exists on the other side of our desires. And so when we give them name, when we're willing to voice our desires, it's a transformative process with God. It can bond us and bring us in closer with Jesus. Right? C.S. Lewis, famous novelist and theologian, he said it best. He said, if we find within ourselves a desire that nothing in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that we were made for another world. Man, tried and true, C.S. Lewis, man, that at the same time, in this in-between time of knowing that we're created for another world, we're created for eternity with God, right? That is the promise that every follower of Jesus can confidently live in, that there is a future that is so much better than the broken world that we're in the here and now. But we're in this in-between time. And so for as long as we are in between this created other world that we hope for, we're still living in this one. But even though in the in-between, we're still given such freedom to give our desires a voice and to allow them to direct our lives towards God. And that is my hope for all of us. That as we listen, that God would speak, that he would direct, that he would point you the way that you truly want. Even if it means some sacrifices along the way, even if it maybe means that it's a difficult choice that might lead to what I eventually want, I hope and pray that God would create in us the kind of resilience as a community that can live out that bold faith life. And so that's the promise connected to that as well, is that God even says that the world of the generous gets larger and larger. And friends, that is my hope, that as we grow as a community, that we become more and more generous, that we see needs. I love seeing the way that as a community we rally to bring clothing, to bring formula and diapers for foster families here in our city. I loved seeing 25 of you step out and to go serve our community last month. I love seeing the ways that when we share with you, hey, here's a need, that you respond with generosity. It's incredible. Ultimately, I desire, as I think about our community, I desire to continue to see God transforming people's lives, don't you? Isn't that something that as a community we can, like, hands in the middle, say, I want to see people who are far from God come to know God. I want to see our city transformed by Jesus. I want to see people empowered to love and follow him. I want to see the next generation of our kids and students released into the world knowing that they don't have to wait till they grow up to start changing the world, because they already know they can, because they have a safe community here where they know who they are, they know who God calls them, and they know that following Jesus is the greatest adventure that they could ever have. Don't we want that? I love seeing that through the ways that so many of you give, through the ways that so many of you serve, that we are seeing God do this miraculous work. And so before we wrap up and continue our worship, I wanted to just take a moment, and as we're talking about desire, right? None of us give, none of you, faithfully invest in this mission out of some kind of, deal that you're paying God off. It's not to appease God out of religious obligation, right? Many of us give around here because it brings us joy, right? Because we believe in what God is doing here at Restoration Church. It's impacted me, it's impacted my kids, and many of you could probably say that as well. If it's impacted your family, if it's impacted your friends, we want to invest in something that is good. We want that for others too. So as we, continue to worship, I wanted to just pause and to invite you to be a part of that. For those of you, like I said, who do serve and give, we're so grateful. But if you feel like you haven't taken that next step yet, if you're sitting here and you're like, I have more to give, I would love to step into that. There's a few ways that you can give around here. I want to share with you how you can begin that journey of trusting God with your finances. So we have a QR code up on the screen. There's 3 ways that you can give around here. One is online by going to restorationchurchsd.com/give. You could also give in person. We've got a secure kiosk in the back, and we've got boxes over here by each door. And then you can also text to give by texting any amount to the number 84321. But however it is that you choose to give, there's also a QR code. I always forget the QR code. But however it is that you choose to give, when we step into this partnership with God, when we step into this community where we're being transformed week after week alongside one another, that God truly is doing an only God kind of work. He's not building this on human effort alone, but he is building this on the desire of so many people that have gone before us who have said, yes, because I desire to see this happen, I'm going to trust God. And so we're just so grateful for that. So as we continue our worship, I'm going to just pray for us. And so I just invite you to pray with me. Thank you so much, God, for your goodness. Thank you that you desire us and that the love you have for us is what started from the very beginning. And God, I thank you that as you stir desire within us, God, as we see our relationships begin to look different, God, I just pray that every single one of us would take some time with you this week, that every single one of us would get quiet, that your spirit would stir in us, Lord, that your voice would be louder than any of the other voices, any of the other distractions, any of the other things that compete for our attention. And Lord, I pray that you would bring desire into clearer focus for every single one of us. And for those whose relationship might be in a place where it's needing repair, God, would you do the miraculous? Would you do that healing work? Would you use the courageous acts of naming desire to bring into clearer focus what you desire our relationships to look like? And I pray for us as a community, Lord, that we would be people who are courageous, that we would be people that show up for one another's, the other people in our lives, God, that we would trust you, that we would seek you, and that we would see you do a mighty work in us and through us. We pray all of this in your name, Jesus. Amen. You can go ahead and stand as we sing together.